Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a situation that marks a significant turning point in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The recent developments have completely severed Moscow's connection to Crimea, a move that has both strategic and symbolic implications. The story begins with the critical supply and transportation routes that linked Russia directly to the Crimean Peninsula for years. These routes have been the lifeline for Russian military logistics, civilian movement, and economic supply chains. But recent Ukrainian operations have disrupted this connection in ways that many analysts did not foresee. One of the most affected areas is the Kerch Bridge, also known as the Crimean Bridge. This structure has been a symbol of Russian engineering and political assertion since its completion, yet it has been heavily targeted by Ukrainian strikes and sabotage efforts. The repeated attacks have caused significant structural damage, forcing Moscow to reroute military and civilian traffic through more complex and longer paths. This disruption is not only logistical, but also psychological, as it challenges Russia's narrative of unbroken control over Crimea. The implications for the Russian military are immediate, and severe supply chains are strained, with fuel, ammunition, and personnel facing delays. The logistical challenge affects frontline operations as units receive supplies less predictably, and with higher risk of interception. These complications could weaken the Russian operational posture in Crimea and adjacent regions, making strategic adjustments necessary. Ukraine, on the other hand, gains a notable advantage in both tactical and morale terms. Each successful disruption highlights the vulnerability of Russian infrastructure and boosts the morale of Ukrainian forces, and the international community observing the conflict. The severed connection also carries broader geopolitical consequences. International observers note that Russia's reliance on limited supply corridors makes its position more fragile than previously assessed. Countries supporting Ukraine are watching these developments closely as evidence of the effectiveness of precision strikes against high-value infrastructure. This may influence future military aid, sanctions, and diplomatic strategies on the civilian front. The impact is significant as well. Transport of goods, services, and even evacuation routes for civilians become more complicated for residents in Crimea. This disruption translates into shortages, delays, and a sense of isolation that has not been seen since the annexation in 2014. Moscow is now forced to consider alternative measures to re-establish connectivity and secure supply lines. The options include expensive and time-consuming construction of new routes, increased reliance on aerial logistics, and intensified protection of existing infrastructure. However, each approach carries risks and limitations as Ukraine continues to monitor and target Russian movements. The strategic recalibration required from Moscow involves both military and political spheres. Domestically, the narrative of seamless control over Crimea has been challenged, and Russian authorities must now manage both the material and psychological repercussions. The international community is also closely analyzing these events as they demonstrate the dynamic and fluid nature of modern warfare, where infrastructure and connectivity play decisive roles. Ukraine's ability to isolate Crimea from Moscow's direct support highlights both strategic ingenuity and operational capacity. This event is likely to become a case study in military academies worldwide for its demonstration of the power of targeted disruption over sheer force. The next steps for Moscow are uncertain, with analysts speculating on a mix of engineering solutions, military reinforcements, and diplomatic maneuvers aimed at mitigating the impact of severed supply lines. Ukraine's position strengthens as the disruption continues, and the longer these supply lines remain compromised, the greater the strain on Russian operations in the region. The situation underscores the broader theme of the conflict in Ukraine, which is the struggle over control, not just of territory, but of the logistical arteries that sustain that control. It shows how infrastructure becomes a front line and how modern warfare increasingly involves engineering, cyber operations, and precision strikes alongside conventional combat. The severing of Moscow's connection to Crimea marks a historic moment in this conflict and serves as a reminder that even the most politically and militarily assertive states face vulnerabilities in infrastructure and connectivity. The coming weeks and months will reveal how Russia adapts to these challenges and whether Ukraine can maintain this strategic advantage or if Moscow finds alternative ways to restore its grip. The disruption of Crimea's lifeline highlights the importance of resilience, adaptability, and the constant recalibration of strategy in modern conflicts. It is a vivid demonstration that control over territory extends beyond mere presence to include the secure movement of people, supplies, and information. As this story develops, the eyes of the world remain on Crimea as a microcosm of the broader conflict and the ongoing struggle between Russian persistence and Ukrainian resistance. The situation also sends a message to other nations observing this conflict about the vulnerabilities inherent in over-reliance on singular infrastructure links and the strategic value of targeting them in modern warfare. Analysts continue to debate the long-term impact of these disruptions, with some predicting prolonged isolation and logistical bottlenecks for Russian forces, while others believe Moscow may find innovative solutions to restore connectivity. The psychological impact on both Russian forces and the domestic audience cannot be overstated, as repeated failures in such high-profile infrastructure challenge perceptions of strength and control. International media coverage amplifies the symbolic importance of these events, portraying the severed connection as both a tactical setback and a propaganda challenge for Moscow. The Russian leadership faces decisions that balance public perception, military necessity, and international diplomacy as they navigate the fallout from these attacks. Maintaining supply lines to Crimea is no longer a routine operation, but a complex strategic challenge requiring resources, planning, and adaptation. The Ukrainian perspective emphasizes the strategic brilliance of targeting such vital connections and turning infrastructure into a force multiplier. The success of these operations may inspire similar strategies in other contested regions worldwide, where supply lines are critical to military success. In conclusion, the complete severing of Moscow's connection to Crimea represents a pivotal moment in the conflict, highlighting the interplay of logistics, strategy, and morale in modern warfare. The consequences extend beyond immediate military considerations to influence political narratives, civilian life, and international perceptions of the conflict. It is a dramatic illustration of how infrastructure can determine the course of events and how control over territory is inseparable from control over the means to sustain it. As the situation continues to evolve, the focus will remain on whether Moscow can overcome these logistical challenges, or if Ukraine's disruption will force a lasting recalibration of power and influence in Crimea and the broader region. The end of the road for Moscow's direct connection to Crimea is more than a logistical issue. It is a strategic turning point that may redefine the dynamics of this conflict for months or even years to come.